Coming up on this week's show, a classic arcade gets an online mode after 25 years.
A Christmas tree for your Amiga.
And we chat about developing on the Atari Jaguar and why Lisp should be your next programming language.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every single Friday with our incredible friends at Bitmap Books. Now, if you're thinking about Christmas presents for yourself, have you seen the unofficial SNES Pixel book? Now, this is an incredible 270-page exploration of the biggest and best games covering all genres of the Super Nintendo with all your favourite 16-bit titles in there. So have a look at that and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our lovely friends at PCBWay. Now, of course, you know about PCBWay. They offer a fully featured custom PCB prototyping service, low cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and they do services like 3D printing and injection molding. And of course, you know that PCBWay are massive supporters of the retro community. So get an instant quote right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 406, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the show. Of course, a podcast that every single Friday takes you on a nostalgic trip back to the classic age of video games. We bring up to speed on all the big happenings, all the news stories that have been making the headlines in the world of retro from over the last week. And of course, we bring you a veteran of the industry to share their story in the second half of the show. And I can't believe that this is our first show of December. Don't know about you guys, but I'm currently looking out my window across my frosty drive. Think we had a bit of snowfall overnight.
This is so cute. My daughter yesterday, we took her for a walk in it and she was going, Jack Frost has given me a kiss. I was like, I was messing around like, I'll mess him up, kissing my daughter. But it was very cute.
Well, I don't know as well. You're getting the Christmas decks up, aren't you, this week, Joe? Is that your
they went
afternoon?
Yeah, they went up yesterday morning. The Christmas decks. Yeah, they're already up. They are been up. You know what? It's every woman's dream. I say every woman's dream, but, you know, wives, they love it. Like, yeah, let's get the Christmas decks. But the poor blokes, they got to go up into the attic, get the ladders out, go up there, get covered in dust, bring it down. We dread it.
We keep ours in the shed, so I've got to go in there and basically, you know, all the crap that we've piled on top of them over the last 12 months, I've got to go right at the back and dig them out this afternoon. So
battle any spiders as well.
Frozen spiders, hopefully, in this weather. But of course, it is that time of year now. Won't be long until he's here. You're excited, Joe?
Oh, yeah.
Well, of course, this does mean now that we're into December, we have only got a couple of normal episodes left of this podcast, or, you know, as normal as this show ever is. We're going to guest next week, and then we're into our Christmas specials already. It's going to be the best of 2023, looking back on the year. And of course, we're getting ready to record this year's annual Christmas super quiz as well. I know Ravi's been feverishly working on the questions over the last week or so.
Yeah, I've got some good ones in there. I think I've got some stingers as well. So it's going to be interesting to see my approach to questions compared to your guys. I don't think I've got any of those how many buttons on a controller one. So, you know, don't get used to your usual questions there.
Yes, I mean, we always look forward to the Christmas quiz that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time as well. Swapping up the format a bit this year, Ravi's going to be Quizmaster, and we've got 3 teams of 2 people as well are going to be battling it out. Me and Joe are going to be rivals this year on the quiz for the first time, so looking forward to it, Joe. Bring it on.
Bring it on.
So before that, though, of course, we have got another incredible show to get through today and an amazing guest as well. Now, of course, I don't know if you guys have booked any time off over Christmas. I've actually got a week off between Christmas and New Year, which is quite rare for me, but I'm looking forward to doing a lot of retro gaming over that week. And actually, I guess this week has inspired me to maybe get through some of my classic Atari Jaguar games that I haven't played for a while, because we're going to be talking to Conrad Barski. Now, he did, it's a bit of a niche game, but it is one of my favourite puzzle games on the Atari Jaguar, a game called FlipOut. You'll hear the story about how he had a really interesting career. He started developing for cable services, and he tells a story about how there's kind of a trial in the early 90s where they sent a load of Silicon Graphics workstations out to all these customers in a certain town that he was working in. And he had the job of basically connecting them up to be interactive services. And he was kind of the first guy that put a pizza button on a remote control. So if you wanted to order a pizza on your TV, you press a pizza button on your remote control. And then, bring
that back.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, how incredible does that sound? A bit like on, Sandra Bullock, The Net, that film. Which
or kind of like the red button on BBC, but for pizza.
Yeah, which, that just sounds incredible. That is something that needs to come back. So he was developing for that, and then we hear the story about how he kind of moved into games programming and ended up working on a couple of titles for the Atari Jaguar, one of which is this really... It's quite a quirky little puzzle game called FlipOut that was actually inspired by his love of juggling, and it turns out his love of aliens as well. We'll hear more about that in a bit.
Yeah, and it's kind of got the pre-rendered graphics in there as well, and it's using a bit more of the Jag's power, so we go into kind of details of programming on the Jag.
Yeah, doing 3D rendering and ray tracing and that kind of thing. And then he was working on a game that got cancelled for the Jaguar CD called Dante's Inferno. So we hear about that in a bit too. And also he's a massive fan of a classic programming language that he's really trying to bring back, isn't he, Ravi?
Yeah, so he's a fan of Lisp, which is, a 63-year-old programming language, but it's got lots of applications that you can use in the kind of modern world as well. So Goal is... game-oriented assembly Lisp, which was used by Naughty Dog, and they actually used it for Jackson Daxter and also Crash Bandicoot. So there's a lot of kind of history and gaming there as well, and it's like one of those old languages like Fortran. So it's quite interesting to hear about why he uses Lisp, and he's wrote some books on it as well.
Yeah, and he's actually making kind of a retro-inspired computer called the Lisperati 1000 to run it. Kind of looks a bit like those old Amstrad PCW word processors.
Yeah.
So we hear all about that. And also making new retro games for the Playdate, which is a system we've talked about before. It's a bit like a Game Boy, but it's got like a handle on the side of it, hasn't it? And
it's a weird one because the handle, I always looked at that and I thought it was for winding it up, a kind of clockwork one, but it's actually like a device for different input, if you're walking and stuff. And there's quite a few innovative games in there, and it's all run off LCD as well. So it's, really low powered. And it lasts ages, the batteries do on those devices. And we haven't really talked about the Playdate much, have we?
No, I mean, there's got to be a killer fishing game on there, I'm sure. That's the perfect control for that, isn't it? So we're going to be joined by this week's special guest, Conrad Barski. He's coming up in around half an hour from now. But of course, before we do that, we like to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro from over the last week. And it's not very often that we see games retroactively online enabled, but Sega are doing it with one of their most loved 90s titles.
Yeah, this has kind of blown my mind a little bit, but also Dan kind of just before we started recording pointed a key detail out to it as well. So this is a Virtual Fighter 3 TB, which the TB is important because of Virtual Fighter 3 came out in 1996. I didn't realize it came out like that long ago. That's not long after the first two in my mind.
I remember playing Virtua Fighter 1 when it first came out, and those polygon graphics were like nothing I'd seen in the arcade before. Blew my mind, that game.
Virtual Fighter 3, it looks incredible, and obviously TB, the updated version that came out in 97, looks even better. And it was
it's not 3 terabytes that it stands for.
I'm not sure what it stands for, to be perfectly honest, but it was
Team Battle, apparently.
Is it Team Battle? Okay, cool. So it was stands for Team Battle. It says it right there. So it was an updated version of Virtual Fighter 3. But the reason we're talking about this is because they have reintroduced the game in Japanese arcades, and like you say, they have given it online capabilities. And at first I thought this was like a mod somebody had made and you play it on the Sega Saturn or Dreamcast or just on emulation or something. But no, this is Sega have put this out, and it has gone into Japanese arcades. And Dan did point out to me, because I was a bit confused, it's not on the original arcade hardware, which would have been crazy.
Yeah.
This is on a cabinet called the On Sega All Dot, I think it's called, the Sega All.net cabinet, which were used for Virtual Fighter 5, and they came out in 2013.
Yeah.
And they work on in Japan, it's very popular. There's like a card system with a lot of arcade games where, imagine like a credit card where you kind of like save your scores and stuff and your data. you put your money into the machine and then you scan your card and you kind of pick up where you left off with.
Well, you can go to different arcades with the card then, can you?
Yeah. That's, essentially it's like it's a memory card essentially, but it is like a little plastic, like loyalty card, like what you might get in a restaurant or something.
So they've taken the team battle, which would be like, local play in the arcades.
Yeah.
If you had 2 or 3 arcade machines and you'd hook up, and then they've added a online function to that.
Yeah,
and,
essentially.
Enabled like matching and, that's a really smart idea. I'd love to see that done on loads of different devices as well, and kind of old arcade games, because that mode's already in there.
Yeah, exactly. And, it just kind of makes me pine for, the glory days of arcade and stuff like that. But that, in Japan, they're revisiting, these 25-year-old franchises. Well, the franchise itself is 30 years old, but these 25-year-old games, which are still popular and still have great, fighting mechanics and stuff like that. And yeah, just incorporating online mode and stuff. And it's Sega. It might be a little bit gimmicky, but there's definitely something in it, I think.
And I think it's interesting as well that the basically, because I've not seen an online enabled arcade cabinet before. So it's cool that you're going to be able to go to an arcade, put your money on or your card or whatever, and be able to play with someone else in another arcade in another location, like virtually, which I think is awesome, because, there are times when, particularly when the arcades were big, you'd often, be playing a game or your mate's playing another one. You want to have a 2-player game, but there's no one else around to hop on it. So I think, for that's just really cool. The fact that you can basically, have a match game with someone else who's in another location on an arcade.
Yeah.
It made me think as well that, Virtua Fighter, I can't remember when was the last game. I've got a feeling it was like Virtua Fighter, was it like 5 or something?
I think it was 5. We actually covered it on the show a couple of years ago, I think, about they did re-release it. But yeah, I want to say
the Ultimate Showdown, 5. Wasn't it? In 21 they released, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it makes me think they should kind of, revisit that for the home platforms. It feels like it's long overdue. So, but the fact that Sega are, giving it a little bit of love, maybe that's on their mind right now. Speaking of which, actually, you spotted this really cool kind of homemade Virtua Fighter robot, didn't you? That I know you've loved this, Joe.
Yeah. This was just a little random. I just thought, what? It's weird that on the same day that this was announced, I spotted that somebody had made a Virtua Fighter 5. I don't know the names of the Virtua Fighter characters, which I'm a little bit ashamed to say. I'm all over Tekken and Street Fighter. And,
it's Akira, the main character.
Okay,
isn't
cool.
It? Akira Yuki.
Okay, cool. I'm glad.
Isn't there like that drunken master as well?
Yeah, there is. Yeah. But yeah, somebody is not based on Virtua Fighter 5. Sorry, he's based on the original Virtua Fighter here. Made a little robot of him kind of doing his little kata, which is pretty impressive. I would love to see that as a little Christmas toy.
There's a 3D printed one that you can get as well.
Oh,
so
really?
You can, kind of fold it and make your own version, or use plastic and do it as well. So I think there's some paper models, and I'm just like looking at a video at the moment on GameSpot of a 3D Virtual Fighter. Robot. Yeah.
I love this. The fact there's some videos that you put on Twitter. I'll link up if you want to check these. Is one of the little Virtua Fighter robot playing the Astro City mini console.
I'm literally just watching that.
Yeah, which is very, very
fantastic.
Cool. So you should definitely sell those. They look awesome. So if you want to check out those videos and the news about Virtua Fighter 3TB, finally getting online play 25 years later, I'll link those up in our show notes as well. Now, we did mention it won't be long until the big man comes down your chimney, and the Christmas games have already started arriving as well. And I thought I'd just mention something very cool that has been running for a couple of years now as well, that I don't think we've mentioned on the podcast before. But if you're an Amiga fan, there is a great resource. It's a website called the Amiga Christmas Tree. Now, this is run by Cami, who Ravi will know. She's like a...
she does the Games Jam.
Yeah, really well known, bigger in the Amiga community. And basically what she does every year is she puts together this list of all the Christmassy games that you might want to play on your Amiga that you can download, including a lot of the classics. I mean, the Christmas Lemmings games are on here, games like, Fire and Ice Christmas Edition and stuff like that. But there's a lot of like new PD games in here as well, and kind of, cover disc demos from back in the day. Links to download them all directly. She's got like a section for Amiga mods that are obviously Amiga music files. So if you want to listen to Wham's Last Christmas blasting through on glorious Paula 8-bit audio on your Amiga.
You could go too much Christmas sometimes, playing the game, listening to the mod.
I love it. Not too much Amiga, too much Christmas.
Yeah, too much Christmas for Ravi.
Never too much Amiga.
Our resident Grinch. And there's a demo section as well with a load of like classic Amiga demos, going back to like 1989 from all of the old cracking crews as well. So if you want something really festive for your Amiga, definitely a website worth checking out. That's called the Amiga Christmas Tree. One that I imagine is going to be making it onto there very soon, because you spotted this, Joe. This looks very cool. This is an unofficial ZX Spectrum to Amiga conversion of a game that I must admit I hadn't played before, a game called Crimbo.
This looks like a conversion that's been done. And I quite like these. When they used to do ZX Spectrum to Amiga stuff, I remember back in the days there were loads of little conversions and kind of cover discs that would come out, that were conversions to Specky games. And sometimes they'd jazz them up a bit and they'd have, sometimes they'd say higher graphics, but a lot of the time I preferred the Specky versions because they had a bit of, soul with them. And when they cleaned them up a bit, some of them lost that kind of quality.
Well, this looks like a more recent Spectrum game. Came out in 2010 by a publisher called Little Shop of Pixels. And the Spectrum version, I'm watching some gameplay footage of it now, looks very similar to the Amiga version, only the Amiga version's got a lot more colours, as you'd imagine. But in terms of gameplay, this does look lots of fun, doesn't it? It's called A Gloop Troop's Tale Crimbo. And it's basically a little platformer game where you play as Santa. Very cutesy.
It feels very arcadey.
Very, very arcadey. It reminds me of is it Bubble Bobble for the
NES?
NES,
That was the first thing I thought. Yeah,
the original.
Or Snow Bros or something like that.
Yeah. It looks really nice, to be fair, and I can see, obviously I know it's not running on the Spectrum, it's running on Amiga, but I can visualize the Spectrum version of it, if that makes sense.
Because it's got a black background.
Yeah, it's the black background.
Like Spectrum games,
the straight edges of it and everything like that. But yeah, this looks nice, this does.
Yeah, and apparently they're constantly upgrading it as well. There's going to be like a new AGA version with more levels on the way soon as well. And they're going to be probably upgrading it even more for next Christmas. But it's one of those games that basically you can name your own price. So if you want something nice and festive for your Amiga, that's available now on itch.io or itch.io. I'll link that up in the show notes too. Now, what about finding this in your Christmas stocking this year, Joe? You ever dreamed about owning a Sega Neptune?
Every night. I write this on my list to Santa every year.
Joe, he's here. He's going to deliver it for you.
He's bringing it me.
Well, this is a reality for at least one person because they've made their own. For people who might not be familiar with the Neptune, explain kind of what it was.
So the Sega Neptune was Sega's cancelled 1995 console, which was essentially going to be a consoleized version of the 32X peripheral for the Mega Drive. So imagine it looked very similar to the concept of it looked very similar to the Mega Drive 2 model, but it was more slick. It was all black, no red buttons or anything. And then essentially it was just going to play 32X cartridges, with controller ports on the front and stuff like that. And it was, it had been revealed by Sega, I think in 1994, destined for a 1995 release, and it was going to be $200.
Yeah.
But obviously the mess that Sega was kind of in at the time with all their console peripherals and add-ons and, the Sega Saturn the Sega Saturn was out, I believe. They scrapped it.
Would have been in Japan by then, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So they did end up, ultimately scrapping it. And the 32X was a failure, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending how you want to look at it.
You haven't got a 32X in your collection, have you?
I haven't got a 32X. And as much as cool as this looks, the reason we're talking about this is a modder who goes by DVI-ZIX has created the Sega Neptune and put it out for 3D printing for people, to go download and print your own model of one. But then obviously you have to be very handy with the old soldering, etc.
Yeah, so essentially what you do is you get your 32X, take it to bits and kind of turn it into a consoleized form and then stick it in this 3D printed case. And there is a lot of soldering and there's a lot of like little devices that you need to actually get it all going. But it's a nice little concept, and having stuff like the having the pads actually connected to it and, all these extra things does turn it into its own like standalone unit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a video of Nacho doing it, and it looks fantastic. Like the finished product, it looks like a high street. You would purchase this from Sega. Like it looks absolutely fantastic. But yeah, he said that the mod did cost $300 without actually the other Sega parts. So that was
before you play for the Mega Drive and the 32X, it costs $300.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and the 32X is not getting any cheaper now either, is it? I remember get mine for 50 quid a few years ago, and it was like, wow.
Yeah, I think a 32X is about £300, maybe.
Just
maybe
needs to add a Sega CD in there as well. And then,
that would be pretty.
A little slot loader in the side. It could work, that actually. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Could work.
Get pretty hot in there, I imagine. But I do think it's very cool. Like you said, it does look, the quality of it looks like it could be a production machine. And I think it would have been nice if that came out kind of an all-in-one Sega Mega Drive with a 32X kind of built in as well. Because I do remember, I've been reading this kind of brought back a random memory, reading the SegaRetro.org article about it as well. They mentioned back in 2001, there was a gaming magazine, EGM in America. They announced that a massive warehouse had been found full of prototypes of the Neptune that were going to go and sell to the general public.
That always put me off. I always thought like the Mega Drive was so good, but then having like the 32X and the Sega CD as add-ons, I always thought they should have released like an actual, new console. And
so they did with the CD eventually with the Multi-Mega.
Yeah.
Which is that's like the holy grail of like Sega. Well, it's not quite the holy grail. There's some other mad Sega stuff out there, but that's generally about £800 for one of them now. But yeah, the 32X, this was the solution to that, Ravi, but yeah, never came to be, unfortunately.
And if you hook a 32X up to a Mega Drive especially when, because I'm looking over, and I know the Sega fans like to big it up as the Tower of Power, but it is such a messy looking thing, isn't it? With all the
it does look messy. And I don't know if that time period between them making a Mega Drive and then going up to the Saturn was that long, but it seemed like ages for me. It was like
no, it wasn't very long at all.
For the next Sega console,
Yeah,
but probably because so many consoles were coming out at that time, it probably seemed like more. Yeah,
and a year felt a long time when you were a kid, didn't it? So yeah, it is cool to kind of see what could have been. I think just having that on your desk, being able to make one yourself, and finally, if you maybe read about that system as a kid and were dreaming of owning one, there are other parts available now by the looks of it to make your own. So if you want to check out that video, I'll link that in our show notes as well. Now, unfortunately, I was kind of hyped for a bit of Christmas viewing. I mentioned I've got that week off coming up a bit later on this month. I thought, I'll sit down and watch this. Unfortunately, it's not out until 2024, but it looks like it could be worth waiting for. This is coming to Amazon Prime, and this is a TV series of a game series, actually, that I think would lend itself very well to a TV show, and it looks pretty good, this. What do you guys think of this? It is a trailer for the new Fallout television series.
I'm looking forward to this one. I really enjoyed The Last of Us. Obviously, it wasn't as action-packed as the game. And
I gave up on The Last. I watched the first maybe 3 or 4, then I
really?
I just didn't get back into it. Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's a little bit slow in the middle, but I think because I loved the game so much, I think, I stuck with it, and I really enjoyed it in the end. But I feel really guilty right now because I adored Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas. I really enjoyed Fallout 4. Got a little bit of hate Fallout 4 did, probably because it wasn't quite as good as them two, as 3 and New Vegas. I have Fallout 1 and 2 on big box for PC, but I've never played them, and I need to go back and play them. But I was watching this trailer and I was like, oh my God, like look at all these little Easter eggs. And then I was like trying to write my notes for the podcast, and I was like, oh my God, what's that character called? Like, what's that called again? And I felt really guilty because I've not really played the Fallout games in years, because there hasn't been one other than Fallout 76, which is the online one, which I never fancied. So I feel guilty because of, I've kind of like not been into Fallout recently, but this is going to bring me back. I think I'm going to, install them again and play them because of the quality of this looks fantastic. And it's Fallout, you've got to remember, is obviously set in like an alternative 1950s. And it's like, I think they've really captured the essence of it in this trailer because of, it's post-apocalyptic, nuclear disaster apocalypse, but then it's all colourful and lovely and bright as well.
Well, the thing is as well, like the Fallout world's really absolutely amazing, and it hinges on the whole nostalgia factor. So I can imagine, an older audience that wouldn't be aware of the video games, like my parents could probably watch Fallout and get stuff about, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the kind of historical points, but also stuff like Oppenheimer coming out recently and being really huge, and that whole kind of idea of like 1950s technology. And I like how in Fallout it advances, but it retains that kind of vibe as well. It's like the Pip-Boy and stuff is imagined kind of piece of technology, and then also the robots in there and stuff. I think it looks really interesting. It's something I'm definitely going to watch, and to be honest, I prefer this than something like The Last of Us, because it feels more, I don't know, grounded in kind of fiction, and it's just my kind of jam, like that whole nuclear disaster and nuclear post-apocalyptic world.
In the fact that you watch the trailer, and like you said, Joe, it's kind of got that kind of, looks a bit 1950s, 1960s sci-fi, doesn't it? The way it's shot, like you said, there's really vibrant colours, and obviously 50s music playing in the trailer as well.
Have they done BioShock? That needs to be one. Though.
I don't think
BioShock.
So, no.
Imagine BioShock, that would be good.
It's funny because I remember us doing a news segment, God, it must have been about 2 or 3 years ago, and I think it was when The Last of Us was announced, and we were talking about an article, and it was saying other, like, video game franchises which would work, and Fallout was one of them. So it's interesting that we're sat here now talking about it. But yeah, really excited for this one, April 12th, 2024.
It does kind of feel like now, a couple of years ago, we'd always talk about movie or television adaptations of video games have been dreadful because they very rarely got it right. But it does kind of feel like, in recent years, it's something they're taken seriously now as like source material.
I think they kind of did so many that it had to come good at the end.
Yeah, so I've got every faith in this. Looks really good from the trailer. A few months to wait for it yet, but if you want to check that out, it's about 1:40. I'll put that YouTube video in our show notes as well. Now, BBC Basic, that was something I used back in the day. And you guys, do you ever try programming? Joe, you ever do any at school? Do you remember?
No.
Never had classes programming at all?
No, nothing like that. No, nothing at my school.
I did, yeah, but it wasn't in Basic. It was a lot of web stuff because I was there when Internet Explorer just hit. So a bit of the older generation. I know, Dan, you were on the black and white computers. And
well, it wasn't quite black and white. How did I am? On the mainframes in the 40s. No, but when we got, in the late 80s, early 90s, we used BBC Micros at school. Then we got Acorn Archimedes. And I remember about, probably when I was about 8, 9 years old, that we had a class where one of our teachers basically just brought a load of magazines in, and it was, I think around that time, that was probably still when the BBC, it was on the national curriculum. The to Learn program, the literacy project was probably still going. So basically we had a couple of classes where we sat down and just did the, 10, go to 10.
Yeah. We had a BBC suite, but it kind of got gutted at that point, and then an Acorn suite came in and took over. So yeah.
We literally had them at infant school. Then when I went to junior school, we had Archimedes, but the Acorn Archimedes could run BBC Basic as well. You literally press, I think it was escape on that, and you went and dropped into BBC Basic.
It's all pure Riscos at mine.
Riscos has got BBC Basic built in.
Oh, okay.
Even now, if you run it on a Raspberry Pi, you can drop into BBC Basic.
It's probably been decades since I've touched Riscos.
So it's a really powerful variation of Basic. Back in the day, it was generally considered, because I remember you could put assembly code in line with it as well. But it was kind of something that we briefly learnt at school, but then I really loved it so much. I remember saying to the teacher, can you teach us a bit more about this? And me and my friend Gary would often, stop back after school for an hour or two while the teacher was marking, just to mess around in BBC Basic. I mentioned before that we tried to do an adventure game that we planned out on graph paper and everything. Didn't go anywhere in the end. It was too complicated. But BBC Basic, I think, if you talk about those kind of classic micros of the 80s, generally regarded as the best version of Basic on those machines. But it turns out that it is actually still going very strong. And the latest version of it only came out 2 weeks ago. And today you can run BBC Basic on pretty much anything. Now, there's a version of this. It's called BBC Basic for STL 2.0. There's a version for Windows, a version for Mac OS, Mac M1 machines, on Linux, obviously a version for the Raspberry Pi. There's a version for Android you can download.
Well, yeah, that's because it's SDL, and SDL is cross-platform, basically. Yeah. So being able to develop in that environment means you'll be able to port it out for everything. I'm sure we'll see, all sorts of devices running this, but it's a really good idea to put it in that SDL, because then you can have it on anything. Maybe even mobile phones,
Well, you can. It's
iOS,
it's on the iOS App Store. You can download it straight from the Apple App Store. There's actually the smartphone version of it has got basically, it's optimized to work on touchscreens. So
that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks incredible. And there are some demos that you can check out. I'll put this article from Hackaday in the show notes too. But they've really kind of souped up the capabilities of this. Now, in terms of the syntax of it, it is still very similar to what you would have used on, the BBC Micro. And actually, if you look at the code they've got running here, it says there's remarks at the top of it. It says this version from September 2001 is for the Acorn A3000. So it looks like they're kind of running a game that they wrote for the Acorn Archimedes that, like you said, is kind of translated to run on basically a modern machine.
Yeah, I guess, porting's going to be really helpful with this and, speed it up.
Yeah, well, there's also, it can access 256 megabytes of memory now as well. There's extra features in there to work with kind of modern graphics cards. And the thing about it, I'm looking at this and I think, kids today, I remember learning stuff like, rudimentary JavaScript and, whatever those web languages were, like you did, Ravi, before I left school in the late 90s, we'll learn a bit of HTML and that kind of thing. But I think, I'm looking at this, do you think there's still a space for this, a programming language like BASIC for kids today?
Yeah, I think there is. And, it's one of the classic languages as well. Now that you talk about it, I do actually remember us doing, I think it was a text adventure. I think it was a text adventure creator in BBC Basic. And, we used to write them as well. So a distant memory of me using that has come up. But, I think as people look back and maybe if you can add some new functions in there, speed up stuff and, get some older software, then put it in BASIC, jazz it up a bit, have it on SDL, have it running on a mobile phone. That's pretty cool.
So, mate, you remember like I do, when you're a kid and you actually make your first program and you see something, even if it's just a Space Invaders ship moving left and right across the screen or a Pong clone, the fact that you've made it, having that running for the first time, it's just an incredible experience.
Yeah, totally, and it's like magic, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, I encourage, more parents and schools to kind of sit down with the kids and do this kind of thing because, I've got my nephew loves video games, but he's got no idea how they work in the back end. I don't think he's only, at the moment, he's 9. So he's probably around the same age I was when I first started doing the basic programming, but he's not learned anything like that at school so far. And I know we've done stories before about them kind of reintroducing programming into the national curriculum. I'm not sure. It seems to come and go all the time. I'm not sure whether it is.
There seems to be a lot of Python around.
Yeah.
And people doing that.
Yeah, which makes sense. Now, I remember, chatting to Francois Lyonnais, who made Amos and Stos back in the day, and he worked on a new version of it, didn't he, a couple of years ago, which I believe is kind of morphed into something else now, but he's kind of marketing that as a game creation engine for kids that's basically based on Amos back in the day, BASIC. So I think there is definitely still, a market for it. And the fact that this can run on so many platforms. If you've got kids who have got a couple of weeks off over Christmas and they fancy, making a game for their iPhone, which looks like it's possible on this. And if you use BBC Basic back in the day, you might be able to help them out a little bit. So there is a website for this and it is available on the apps, like I said, as well. I've tried to go to the website, which is bbcbasic.co.uk/BBC SDL, although it's telling me right now that the bandwidth limit for the website has been exceeded.
Oh, wow. It's popular then.
So, very nice to see BBC Basic continuing into the modern age. So hopefully that site will be back up very soon. Now, we're going to be chatting to this week's special guest, Conrad Barski. He's coming up in just a moment, talking about developing for the Atari Jaguar and also his love of Lisp as well and making games for the Playdate. But of course, before Christmas, we have still got a few weeks left of work. And we've talked about this before, Joe, the fact that, when we get into the office of a morning or if you're working remotely as well, how many different services you have to log into every day.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. Every single day I come in, I have to boot up my laptop, which I've been told I can't keep open anymore because I'm killing it. Can't just put it on sleep overnight. So I
wasting
come in,
that battery.
open it up, turn on all my different apps. You've got to open Teams, you've got to open Outlook, you've got to open, I can't go into any of the other things I've got to open because of work, but I'll have a good, 20 different apps open down at the bottom of my taskbar there. And it is just tedious doing it every single day. And then having to navigate it, across 2 or 3 screens every single day as well.
even pulling that data together, trying to get them to work with each other as well. I mean, one of the companies I work for must have about 3 intranets. You never know where to find a file. I mean, they're all over the place. So why don't you simplify that? I mean, if you work with a company or a small business, or even for yourself as well, this could be really useful. Now, this is this week's sponsor, our wonderful friends at Notion. Now, Notion is incredible. Not only does it bring all your services into one handy workspace, but one incredible thing about it, and obviously this is a thing that everyone is interested in right now, is artificial intelligence. And Notion bring the power of Notion Q&A, which is their AI tool, to basically all of your workspaces and everything that you could do in your daily work life, your notes, your docs, your company-wide projects, all of that as well, with their AI assistant that can answer questions. For example, you could ask it, a question about next quarter's company roadmap, and it could find that for you. It could maybe a question about the marketing campaign proposal that you're looking for, or a long-lost link that one of your colleagues sent you 6 months ago. It can do that all in seconds for you. So occasionally you'll get it, like me, Joe, you'll need an urgent bit of information, and you think, how do I keep my sanity intact? Right, who sent me that? Looking through your messages. Notion will save you all of that when because obviously your work gets complex as well. Rather than digging through all your files and your conversation histories, Notion Q&A comes in and it will answer any questions you've got, making use of your entire database of knowledge to make sure that the answers are actually really helpful as well. So Notion AI can give you instant answers to your questions using information from across your company work, your wiki, your projects, your docs, your meeting notes as well. Rather than turning to a co-worker to ask them, ask Q&A. It will search through thousands of documents in seconds, and it will give you an answer in a clear language, no matter how large or complex your workspace is. So that means Notion AI will do all the tedious stuff for you, meaning that you can concentrate on your meaningful work, and you can try it for free. Now, we've got you an amazing link, of course. Check this out. You'll be really helping out the podcast. Support our sponsors, support the podcast. Try Notion AI for free by going to notion.com/retro hour. All lowercase, notion.com/retro hour. Try out the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI today. When you use our link, support the podcast, notion.com/retro hour. And we massively appreciate the support of our wonderful friends at Notion. Now, it will be our little patrons Christmas do coming up in a couple of weeks. I think we're doing the December Christmas hangout a bit earlier this month, aren't we? Because we normally do it on the last Sunday of the month. We figured out that's, I think it's New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve.
I think people might be a bit busy during that time.
Just us three. I'm sat there with a black eye because my missus has gone ballistic at me for doing the retro hour.
Where is everyone?
Where is everyone, guys?
I'd do it from a rave.
Yeah. And then the week
on my phone.
The week before is Christmas Eve.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're either doing it mid-month or we're going to do it on a Friday or Saturday night. But we'll let people know. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's only a couple of weeks if you want to join us for that as well. You might have heard us talking about this before. Basically, our massive virtual users group where we get a load of our patrons together. We geek out about all things retro, anything can come up in the conversation. Great little community that we've got there, and we welcome new users in all the time. So we'd love to see you there for the Christmas hangout that is coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Of course, their Christmas jumpers are encouraged for that one too. And if you do join us on Patreon, now's a very good time. Not only will you get access to the hangout this month as well, but also you'll unlock, I think it's now 37 back episodes of the bonus patrons only podcast that we do. Forgot the name of it then. The Retro After Hours.
The bonus one.
That's the other podcast.
Yeah. So we do this every month. It's, an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes, where we do a different topic each month, obviously all about retro. And we're recording the latest one, the December one, next week as well. So if you want to get access to all of that, along with getting the usual podcast early some weeks, you get it ad-free every single episode. And we're actually doing another about 10 minutes of news just for our patrons. And you get that on every single episode. So if you'd like to sign up right now, a very good time to support this podcast and make sure that we can continue going into 2024, just by throwing a couple of quid a month into the tip jar. All the details to sign up are at theretrohour.com. And we do have a couple of new patrons to induct into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming. And I'll let you guys induct them into the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
Who we got, Ravi?
Richard Vernon.
And Steve Liderman.
Thank you so much for your support, guys. We really appreciate that. And if you'd like to join our wonderful patrons community, all the details are at theretrohour.com. Right then, patrons, stay tuned. A couple more stories coming up for you in just a minute. For everyone else, there will be more news on next Friday's podcast. And next, we chat to this week's special guest, Conrad Barski, all about developing for the Atari Jaguar, his love of the Lisp programming language, all of that and more, next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And someone who's really interesting, actually, got a very varied career, including working on, regular listeners will know that I collect for the Atari Jaguar, and a game that I used to love back in the day, FlipOut, a really interesting puzzle game on the Jaguar, and an unreleased title for the Atari Jaguar CD that we'll talk a bit about too. And also, he's a big supporter of the Lisp programming language, and is working on some really interesting current retro-inspired platforms, including the Playdate console. So we'll talk about all that and more, I'm sure, with this week's special guest, Conrad Barski. How's it going, Conrad?
It's going great. Greetings from Mill Valley, California.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking a bit of time out of your busy morning to join us. It's a dark evening here in the UK now, so the nights are drawing in, but it's going to be interesting to chat to you for the next 45 minutes or so about some of these great titles that you worked on. I mean, one thing that we always like to do with our guests is kind of find out where their journey began, right from day one. I mean, do you remember your first introduction to computers? What first got that bug? What got you interested in them?
Yeah, so I probably had a pretty strange background in that regard. I, from 2 to 6 years of age, I grew up on the island of Ibiza. So this was in the late 70s. Wow. This is an island in the Mediterranean. You guys in the UK, of course, know about Ibiza.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of isolated from technology altogether. We didn't even I think we had a couple of arcade games that showed up towards the end when I was there. I remember seeing a breakout cabinet there, but no computer exposure. And then once I was school age, my parents moved back to Germany where we lived at the time. And and my dad bought that was around the time when the TI-99 4A was kind of starting to fall apart in terms of a viable platform, and so you could buy them very cheap in the bargain bins of the tech stores in Germany. And so my dad picked up a TI-99 4A, and I remember he started programming the first program in the manual, which was of course hey, what is your name? And then it says and then it prints the name on the screen, and then it says 30 go to 20, and then it does the infinite loop where it prints your name. And he worked on that for 3 hours, and he couldn't get the program working. And then he realized that he had used a letter O instead of a zero when he typed in the line number, and that because of that the program wouldn't run. And so that was so frustrating. He never touched the TI-99 4A. He just handed it to me, and I immediately got addicted to computer programming after that. And just went crazy on the TI-99 4A back in the day. But that was already the end of the glory days of the TI-99 4A. So I had a bit of an outdated computer. But certainly that I got the video game programming bug at that time.
It's a good job that the Texas Instruments didn't do a better job with that manual then. Otherwise, your career may have never begun in computers. Yeah,
the manual was spectacular, actually. I really enjoyed it. And the... Well, I guess my dad, no manual is going to tell you that you can't use the letter O for zero.
Yeah.
But yeah, the manual was actually really good. And I had the extended basic cartridge, which allowed you to do 28 sprites at once, which was kind of crazy because the Commodore 64 could only do 8 sprites at a time unless you were doing crazy assembly tricks. So it was actually a pretty capable platform.
So tell us a bit more about your journey with computers then. So after the Texas, did you get another machine? What did you kind of upgrade through? And what was kind of your path with computers when you were young?
Yeah, so I guess I upgraded to the Commodore 64 at some point, and especially I got really addicted to the SID music, and I still listen to SID music every day while I'm working. And that's kind of where I picked up assembly language and stuff. And and then my parents moved to Florida. And that's where I just randomly happened to end up at this company called Guerrilla Systems, which was kind of a video game developer in near Tampa in Florida. And there was this weird thing back then. There was something called the Time Warner Interactive Cable Trial. So the idea was this was in the days when the idea of having video on demand was an unbelievable concept. And so what they did is they took some Silicon Graphics servers and they put them in a neighborhood in Orlando. and they gave everyone like a Silicon Graphics workstation that they told just in one neighborhood they did a trial, and they just told everybody, this is your new cable box. And and on the servers they had like 100 movie titles that they had MPEG'd at like really low quality, but back then it was like unbelievable that you could just have 100 movies on demand on a server, and people could buy movies on using their television. The idea was the way the future was going to happen is that television was going to become interactive, which of course is completely not how things turned out with the internet and everything. But yeah, so I worked on some of that, and so when I was in college, I was working on an application that let you purchase pizza using your remote control in your TV. So it was like an interactive app where you could. So the idea was you would watch TV, and then there'd be a pizza commercial, and then you could press a button on your remote, and then you could actually order a pizza. And, that just blew everybody's mind because this was like before the internet was like well known. And and so I made like the app that let you put the pepperoni slices on the pizza and stuff. And it was all programmed in 3D and OpenGL because this was like a Silicon Graphics computer that everybody had as a cable box. And then a little later they got some, because Time Warner was working with Atari at some capacity, we got some opportunity to work on Atari games.
That's incredible. I remember watching Sandra Bullock ordering a pizza on her computer in the movie The Net and thinking, I hope I see that in my lifetime. And obviously you doing it back then as well. That's awesome. So, I mean, obviously FlipOut was the game that you were best known for on the Atari Jaguar. And for people not familiar with that title, I mean, it was a very interesting puzzle game as well. So I'm quite interested to hear kind of the background on the development of that game and kind of your inspirations for it. I mean, were you a puzzle game fan before you started work on FlipOut?
So I was always a juggler. So I was kind of thinking it would be fun to have a juggling dynamic in a puzzle game. And that's basically how the FlipOut design came about. So basically you have these tiles on a board, and you always have one more tile than you have spaces on the board. So you constantly have to basically juggle the tiles on the board in order to not have the thing crash. And so that was kind of the initial idea behind FlipOut. And then right around that time is when people started experimenting with ray traced graphics in video games. I'm not talking about like real time ray tracing. I'm just talking about you have your computer sit for a couple of days ray tracing some graphics, and then you just turn those into bitmaps and you load them into a game, and then you have a quote unquote ray traced game. So there were a lot. This was around the time when Donkey Kong Country came out, and they did the same kind of thing. So that's what we wanted to do with this game. So we ray traced, it was all 3D modeled graphics and ray traced, and then turned into bitmaps, and then kind of composited on the Atari. And that was kind of how the game came about.
What did you think of the system when it came out as well, the Jaguar, and what was it like developing for? Because I know a lot of people didn't use its full power because it was quite tough, notoriously, to develop for.
Yeah, so basically what Atari did is they, I guess I don't know quite the origin story of the Jaguar, but my impression was that there were like a couple of developers that worked on this game called Cybermorph. And so they wanted to do basically a 3D sort of shoot 'em up game. And they the chipset was kind of designed around that game. And the basic idea behind the game is that it was going to be grow shaded polygons, so no textures, just sort of a shading on polygons. And they tried to figure out how can we make a chipset that can do this as kind of efficiently as possible at a low price. And so the architecture they came up with was kind of insane. So the Atari Jaguar had 4 chips, one Motorola 68000, which was a pretty traditional processor, and then it had these 2 chips called Tom and Jerry, which was one was kind of designed for audio stuff and the other one for graphics. And those were like sort of state-of-the-art RISC chips. But what was weird about them is they had like a cache that was really small. If you didn't use the cache, they were basically very slow. And then the 4th chip was this blitter chip, which could basically just like move chunks of memory around very quickly and do a couple of other things. And of course, they always sold the Atari Jaguar as a 64-bit system. And the reason they did that is because the Blitter chip could move 64 bits at a time around. But of course, nothing else in the system was really in any meaningful way 64-bit. But yeah, the tricky thing is that the people that developed the Cybermorph game, which was the original pack-in title, they came up with this crazy pipeline where they would basically move a small amount of data into this cache for these two very fast processors, and then they would like operate on it, for like 10 milliseconds or something, and then they would send the data back to the main through the main RAM to the main system, and they would do this like for every frame they would do this like 20 times or something, and they would so it was this very crazy way of doing 3D graphics. But if you were really gifted and you really understood the hardware, you could make like a pretty decent 3D game with it. But I think the problem was that Atari didn't really buy in 100% into the sort of 3D game concept, because that was around the time where people weren't sure would 3D games be any fun, because everything before that had been basically 2D. And there was a question, maybe people just want to play 2D platformers and nobody cares about 3D. And of course, Sony did the exact opposite. They just said, okay, forget about coming up with some kind of sophisticated architecture that's really flexible. We're just going to make this thing that can push texture mapped triangles at high speed. And that's what they did with the Sony PlayStation. And that ended up being the winning strategy. And so Sony basically trounced everybody else. And Jaguar was a victim of that. It was really hard to program for, and it could do lots of. It was a very general system where you could do lots of different types of graphics, but that was the wrong strategy. All you wanted was texture map triangles.
And a couple of years later, FlipOut got a release on DOS and Windows as well. Were you involved in that process?
I was not, but the programmer on that version was really gifted, and that version is actually, I would say, it's a lot more sophisticated than the original version, but it follows the same formula in terms of the same graphical style, and but it just had a lot more gameplay, a lot more. The thing is, because it wasn't a difficult platform to program for, they could invest a lot more in like the other things, like the number of levels and the different types of enemies and stuff. So it's a very nice version.
It's an interesting time in the industry as well, because you think, those couple of years that the Jaguar was on the market, it just felt like such a transition, didn't it? You had stuff like the 3DO came and went, and, Amiga CD32 was on the market briefly, and lots of these other systems that some of them were only on the market for 6 months. It was a massive shift between the Mega Drive Genesis and Super Nintendo until the PlayStation took over. So I guess backing the right console was a difficult thing, a bit of a gamble, really. And then I know that Atari tried to extend the life of the Jaguar by bringing out the CD add-on in 1995. And I know you're working on a project on that called Dante's Inferno. What was kind of the story behind that then and the development of that title?
Yeah, well, we were working with the Atari Jaguar and just trying to figure out like clever things you could do with the graphics chipset. And one thing you could do pretty well is like do interesting things with like sort of creating your own sort of video codecs, where you take different frames of graphics and you like interpolate between them. And so we were trying to do this game that was, the idea was kind of like an interactive movie where you could like, but where the video, is rendering some sort of 3D world, and you could kind of decide where you want to go, and then it would sort of, have pre-rendered video for that part of, the world that you want to move through. So, a lot of other games have done similar things like that. So that was kind of what we wanted to do with Dante's Inferno. But what had happened is that when we first started working on the Jaguar, they had just won some kind of lawsuit. I forget who it was against. It might have been against Sega, but it was a lawsuit for like anti-competitive practices. And so briefly, Atari had a really big war chest with money from this lawsuit. And so that's why they kind of tried to get a lot of developers, some funding to develop games for the system, including my employer, Gorilla Systems, and that money, ran out pretty soon. And so at that point, they were kind of, they couldn't really do anything other than just have a few core developers that they work with at Atari, do any kind of games and stuff. So we made a demo for this Dante's Inferno game, but it never went very far. And the demo is pretty primitive. I mean, one thing I kind of wonder in general about like the video game sort of market at that point is that I think that was kind of the point where people started realizing that the US no longer really had a dominance in hardware like they had in the past. Now, of course, back then in '95 when our game came out and when the Atari Jaguar had its heyday, like the biggest chip company in the world was Intel, and everybody thought, the US is the place to build electronics. But I think we now see that that the hardware side of things has shifted to Asia. And I think that era of video game consoles kind of was the first sign of that, with Sony dominating so much because they were just really good at hardware. And of course, companies like Jaguar, like Atari, they were using U.S. companies to develop the chipset. And of course, Nintendo worked with Silicon Graphics to develop the original Nintendo 64. And I think that that may not have been the best decision. They ended up being a little bit behind early on. And of course, now the Nintendo 64 is a beloved system. But back then, it was kind of not so successful initially because the PlayStation came out earlier and it just had such a great number of titles for it.
Well, I know that you're a big fan of the programming language Lisp. And most 80s micros I remember using had BASIC built into them, but obviously you could often get Lisp as an additional language on a disk or a cartridge. What is it that appeals to you about the language Lisp?
Well, at the bottom level, I guess it's just the idea that you kind of want computers to be extremely malleable, and at the most extreme, there was always the idea of sort of self-modifying code. Wouldn't it be great if you wrote programs that could like change themselves and how they work and stuff. And Lisp is really kind of the extreme version of that. So you can essentially, when you write a Lisp program, you think to yourself, well, what would be the best programming language for solving my problem? And then you kind of first use Lisp to design that programming language, and then you write your program with it. So it's kind of a mind-bending experience if you really get into Lisp, because you have access to like lots of low stuff inside the compiler and interpreter of the language, where you can change things on the fly in terms of what the interpreter sees, and you can do like really elegant and cool things in that way. And also, like, because I was never professionally trained as a computer programmer, so I was always kind of a cowboy programmer. I just would kind of just go have at it and try to do cool things, not worrying about, is this thing going to crash, or is it a good design or whatever. I just love, programming and trying out stuff. And Lisp is great in that respect because it's a dynamic programming language. So you can kind of just start hacking away and seeing what happens. There's other cool academic languages like Haskell is always sort of another one that is mentioned, but that one is extremely strict. You have to the compiler will, you spend all your time just trying to get the compiler to stop complaining about your code. And then as soon as it stops complaining, usually your program works right out of the gate. But it's so frustrating to work in, whereas Lisp will just let you do anything.
It's amazing that it's kind of been around since the 1960s. So, 63 years old. And it's one of the kind of high-level programming languages that's still used. Did you have much experience with Fortran at all? And do you think Lisp is still relevant today?
Yeah. So there were lots of... Lisp is one of those things that had lots of ideas, and a lot of them already got stolen by other programming languages over the years. So it doesn't seem so exciting maybe these days. But there were things like, garbage collection first happened in Lisp and is used in almost any programming language these days. Yeah, in terms of like things that are really relevant these days, yeah, I mean, it has really interesting things in terms of like exception handling and stuff. that's you still can't get in modern languages. And because it had this idea that like computer code and data are the same thing, that's like really helpful for like web development and stuff. With things like people are probably familiar with like React and JavaScript. So there's cool things you can do with basically writing HTML using Lisp. And because HTML is sort of structured kind of like a programming language, you can do like super efficient like stuff with building web pages and stuff, and people use it for that sort of thing.
It's interesting because I saw that they were appealing for some old Fortran programmers recently to work on infrastructure and stuff that has a lot of the old code. Is any of the old code still used? And do you have any people that kind of come in and recover Lisp code and get it going again?
Yeah. Well, there's still some pretty big companies that use Lisp. I think most of the stuff in Google that when you like look up airplane flights and stuff, that was all came from a company. I think was it ITA Software that they bought, but that was all written in Lisp, and it still is all written in Lisp from what I understand. So they actually have a Lisp programming team inside Google to do like flight reservation stuff. Then there's also there's a popular note editing tool called Roam, which people use for kind of keeping track of like all their personal notes. And that's all written in Lisp. Those are kind of some of the projects that come to mind. Now, obviously, the Lisp was originally developed by this guy, John McCarthy, in the, I don't even know, I think it was the late 50s. So it's like crazy early. And so there's lots of sort of very old Lisp code that people always keep discovering code on old tapes and stuff and talk about it online. But I guess people always thought that Lisp would be like the solution to the AI revolution. And so in the 70s, people went really crazy about coming up with AI systems using symbolic reasoning. And Lisp was kind of the tool of choice. But of course, that was like a complete failure. And then we had this thing called the AI winter. And of course, we no longer have an AI winter in 2023, that's for sure.
Well, I know you wrote a popular book called Land of Lisp. So how does that kind of connect back to, what you were working on, in terms of games as well? I mean, did your development of, games like FlipOut have any influence on you developing into, writing this book? And how does it kind of connect back to that?
Yeah, so I was always a big fan of the book 101 Computer Games, which they had in our German library where I was a kid and had my TN-89 So I programmed like probably all of the 101 games from the book I typed them all into my TN-89 And so I just love this idea of like simple games. And I mean, that's obviously what's appealing about retro gaming is the idea that these old consoles had a lot of constraints, and sometimes constraints produce creativity. They lead to more creativity, and that meant there were lots of simple games on old systems like the TN-89 and the Commodore 64, and those were in a way could be more creative just because you were forced to do as much as possible with so few resources. And and because games are instantly understandable in terms of like what the point is of a game as opposed to some other application, it's a great teaching tool. And so I thought, well, what if we made a Lisp book where every single chapter in the book had a new game that you program from scratch? And so I had to figure out how to come up with like 12 different games where each one of them introduced new programming concepts that are discussed in that chapter. So there was a really hard sequencing problem because I had to make sure, of course, that each game didn't use any features of like a future chapter. And I had to figure out how to make all the games interesting. And so that's how Land of Lisp came about. So each chapter is a game, and you learn new Lisp programming concepts in each chapter. And then at the end, you have the last game is a more sophisticated game.
Did you have much experience of any of the dialects of Lisp? So game-oriented assembly Lisp, which was used by Andy Gavin and Naughty Dog.
Yeah, so I know they were out there, and it was a logical thing to do to if you're going to create some kind of scripting language for your game. Lisp is a good choice because one of the tasks that you have to do with a programming language is you have to parse the text. One of the things that people always complain about with Lisp is that there are too many parentheses. But that made it so that the parser, the parsing process, turning the raw text into some sort of organized structure, the raw text of a computer program, that made it's very easy in Lisp to do that process, the parsing process. And so it's a good choice if you need a scripting language inside of a video game to use a Lisp. And so, yeah, as you were saying, Naughty Dog had their own Lisp dialect. Now, I've never used any of these, but several games have Lisp dialects for scripting purposes, and it's a good choice for that.
I think it was Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter as well. But Sony basically said to them, you have to change once they joined up with Sony.
Yeah.
So I've heard over the years that Lisp is supposed to be a good introductory language for people that want to learn programming. For example, when I was a kid, I would do what many kids did back then. I'd open the manual for my Commodore computer and type in the listings in BASIC. And I tried to learn C when I was a teenager, pretty unsuccessfully. And I imagine that a lot of our listeners will probably be in the same boat. They maybe experimented with programming back in the 80s or 90s, didn't really pick it up, but maybe have always kind of regretted not doing that. I mean, do you think today is Lisp a good, accessible and fun language for people that may want to, kind of take those first steps into programming?
Well, I certainly think it's very fun, and I would look at the Clojure programming language, spelled Clojure, which is like the most popular Lisp dialect right now, and it's very easy to use. It's very modern, and you can use any Java libraries you want. So even though Java programming is absolutely no fun, you can just use all their libraries and use them in your Lisp code. And there's a huge community around Clojure, and people are super friendly, and also some very good books on the Clojure language. So that would definitely be if you're interested in Lisp and you kind of want to work with a programming language that's a little more mind-bending, that's the one to look at. I should also point out that a big proponent of Lisp is Paul Graham, who people might know as sort of a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And he also maintains the Hacker News website, which is entirely programmed in Lisp. And so those are some. So I would definitely look at Clojure, and I would look at Paul Graham's essays. He's written a lot of essays about the Lisp language, and he actually wrote a couple of books as well on Lisp.
Can you tell us about the Lisperati 1000 project then? That sounds interesting.
Oh, yeah. So for fun, I 3D printed a small cyberdeck. So there's like a cyberdeck community on Reddit. A cyberdeck is basically a computer where the screen and keyboard are sort of packaged together into sort of a brick. There's lots of different cyberdecks, but that's kind of the standard format. And so there's this company in China that makes screens for rear view mirrors in cars. And what's nice about it is it's this long horizontal screen. So you can just stick like a 40% mechanical keyboard underneath it, and then you kind of have this device that's kind of like a large book that has a keyboard, a screen, and then you can just stick a Raspberry Pi in it. And then you've got kind of a strange portable computer that's kind of retro futuristic looking. So I 3D printed my own design of this and put it online, and people were excited about it. So I attempted to turn it into a kind of a hobby project, and it's still not totally defunct. I still want to release it at some point. I have a closet full of parts for the first batch of these, But yeah, so it's basically an aluminum milled computer with a sort of a long horizontal screen and a keyboard that's kind of brick shaped or book shaped. And, the idea is basically to have kind of a note taking device that is sort of not as obtrusive as a full laptop. So, and that has a nice mechanical keyboard.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It reminds me a bit of, like the old Amstrad PCW kind of portable word processors from the early 90s, that kind of, that kind of vibe to them. I think, it's something that's dedicated to a singular task, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, that was exactly the idea, is to kind of borrow some of the ideas from those old TRS and Amstrad portable devices. The trick, of course, is that it involves hardware, and hardware, as everybody will tell you that works with hardware, is just hard. And software, I'm a software guy, so I was kind of in over my head on the project, but I still have hopes of getting it completed. I do have all the parts, so I may release it as a kit at some point, and people can put it together themselves, because it's really the soldering work involved in putting the thing together is quite difficult, and it's something that is hard to do reliably, and to kind of find people here near where I live that can do the manufacturing of the device.
Well, tell us about the Playdate system as well, because, I think we covered this on the podcast a couple of years ago. This is basically a monochrome, almost like a Game Boy lookalike device, a small handheld console. For those that are not familiar with the Playdate, tell us a bit about it then, and kind of what you're doing on that system at the moment.
Yeah, so I just always love gadgets, and I just bought one of these things on a lark, or I should say I pre-ordered it, and then I had to wait like a year until my pre-order got filled. But it's just... it's like the most minimalistic modern game device you can imagine. It's it's just like a little mini Game Boy looking thing, and it has a very crisp screen, but it's just monochrome, and it has low resolution. And then then it has like a regular joypad and buttons. But then the one unique thing it has is it has a crank on the side. And you have you can get absolute and relative positioning of the crank and use that as an extra element in your game. So I just bought one of these for fun, and I really loved the design. And because this is produced by kind of a smaller company, they're super friendly for indie developers. So if you're somebody who wants to develop, who likes doing like retro games and stuff, I would really recommend looking at this, because you can create a relatively simple game, and you can they have a app store where you can sell it, and it's great for like a little bite-sized development project. And I thought it would be fun just to try to do something that I can complete in a few months, and actually ship a product, because that's always the thing every software developer struggles with on their personal projects, is we all have these epic ideas, and we work on these projects that never see the light of day. So I'm trying very hard not to let that happen. And then this additional thing is, because I'm like a computer language freak, there's this other new language that I really like called Zig, which is kind of designed as a C replacement language.
Right.
And some crazy person figured out the Zig bindings for the Playdate. So you can actually write Zig code and use it to make a video game on the Playdate. So that's how I ended up working on my game, because I just love Zig programming. So it's a totally different language than Lisp, because it's very low level, very close to sort of assembly language. But it's very the design of it is very elegant. The person Andrew Kelly, who designed it, is just has very good taste. So it's a pleasure to program with.
It sounds a fun challenge as well. Yeah, using a new programming language that you're still kind of getting your head around for a new platform as well. I mean, is that what kind of attracted you to this? Because obviously some people might be, why make a game for a monochrome handheld as opposed to making something like the Switch? Is it those kind of limitations that you mentioned before, and that exploration of a new platform that attracted you to it?
Yeah, exactly. It's very limited. And of course, part of being limited is that you can, usually it means that you can release things faster because, there's just so much you can do. So I was hoping that if I try to do a Switch game or something, who knows if I'll ever get it done, because I'm sort of at a point in my life where, I worked for 15 years in the medical software industry, and that's how I made my living. And now I don't have that kind of pressure where, if I don't finish my game, like I'm not going to be able to pay my rent or anything. I don't have that problem anymore. So I really, if I work on something, it has to be something that can be completed in a reasonable amount of time without me working, 15-hour days or whatever. So that's part of the appeal. And then I started thinking about the crank. And so what I'm doing is I'm building this game where you are a sort of an alien. For some reason, I always get back to aliens because I created the mascot for the Lisp language, which is an alien character. And then FlipOut had aliens. And now my new game also has crazy looking aliens. But so the aliens, they basically have all these body parts, arms, legs, eyes, and other things. And then when you use the crank, it flips around where the body parts are on their body. So you can like put a foot on your head, and then the feet are sticky. So you can, if you jump up and you have a foot on your head, you can attach yourself to the ceiling by your foot. And then it allows for interesting game mechanics like that. So that's how the game is going to work.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, I'm super happy with it, and in fact, I'm already breaking my rule because I got like super into into like polygon geometry, math, and stuff to do the animation for the player character in the game, and so it's like become a more ambitious title now. And if it ever makes it out for the Playdate, I might actually consider trying to do a Switch version in the future.
The Playdate seems like a really interesting console. It's it looks a bit deceptive to me. It looks like it's something that's a bit old school, but actually you've got stuff like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth in there as well. Quite a bit of RAM. The battery life lasts long. What are people's reactions like when you get one out and you say, I'm kind of developing a title for this?
Yeah, well, the hardware is beautiful. It was developed by that company, what is it called? Teenage Electronics or whatever, that Swedish company that does all the awesome hardware devices. So it looks beautiful, and people get excited when they see it, and it's one of those things where people can't help themselves. They start playing with it, and it's really a great device. And what's nice about it is that it has this indie vibe around it, kind of like, the retro community. And so there's lots of quirky titles that people have released for it. And and they're all kind of bite-sized titles. So it's a great device. You can kind of keep it in your pocket. And then, when you're waiting at the bus station or something, you can play something for a few minutes. It's really a great device in that regard. Now it is a little bit pricey. I think what is it going for right now? I think maybe $199 here in the US. So for a pretty basic device like that, you're kind of paying a premium for the design and for the community that is built around it, and the libraries that they've built. So, but it's a really fun little device.
And it definitely sounds like you've got your passion for game making back again using the Playdate.
Exactly, and I just have to ship. That's always the problem. So I spent like months just working on the character design for the player character, and that now I'm working on like the level and the movement, and I still don't have a full game. And of course, every time I work on another part of the game, it's like, I have these crazy ideas for how I could do something innovative, and I have to stop myself. At some point, I have to keep things simple to get it out the door, and not just always create new problems for myself.
Well, I know that obviously FlipOut has still got, a lot of love in the Jaguar community, and, a lot of retro gamers in general love that game. I mean, would that be anything you'd ever consider kind of revisiting, maybe a FlipOut 2 for the Playdate, or an updated version of it?
That would be fun. I don't think I own the rights for it. I have no idea who does own the rights. I think it might be Guerrilla Systems, and I'm still in touch with those guys, so I could ask them if there was if I could get licensing for it or whatever, or I don't know how that works. Maybe the licensing is expired. I guess it wouldn't expire because it would be copyright. Yeah, that would be kind of fun. I mean, of course, outside of like the retro community, I mean, it's a pretty deep cut in terms of like it's pretty obscure.
Yeah. Would you make any changes you can think of that you'd make to it if you were to do it again?
Well, it's tricky because like we were, the limiting factor was that the crazy thing with the Jaguar was you had these 4 processors and you had to write assembly language in 4 different dialects basically, and all of them shared a common RAM bus. And so what would happen is you would write a piece of code for one of the chips and it would work well. And then you'd write the code for the next chip. The first chip wouldn't work anymore because the second chip was using more RAM calls. And it would basically, so the first chip would be limited by how much data it could get from the main RAM. And so it was just a real struggle to work on. I mean, everybody who worked on the Jaguar will tell you that. So our limiting factor was just getting, anything to work at all. And we were sort of limited in terms of how much thought we could put into the game, as I said, like the number of levels and enemies and stuff. But I think, I actually think the DOS version is a pretty good vision of how I would have liked the Jaguar version to be.
Fantastic. Well, Conrad, it's been incredible hearing some of your memories about those days developing back in the 90s, and also incredible, like I said, that you've got that passion still burning strong for indie game development now as well. So we'll have to keep in touch, and you'll have to let us know when the title comes out for the Playdate, and if you manage to do that Switch port, then we'll obviously give it a mention on the podcast. Yeah,
that would be awesome. I will let you know, and it was really fun talking with you guys. And I mean, I really love the retro community, and it is obviously this real strange thing where people like us are, we have this affection for these old games, and what was it about the old games that made them so much more interesting than the new ones and all that? Really good question. And I love listening to you guys, and maybe at some point we'll get to talk again.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Conrad. Thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Bye-bye.